My name is Ralph Wetterhahn. Every time I come back to Phnom Penh, I'm struck by what a hurry everyone is in leaving the past behind. During the Vietnam War, I flew 180 missions as a combat pilot. And 25 years later, a chance assignment to write an article about the final battle of the Vietnam War brought me back to this part of the world. 6 years and as many trips to Cambodia led to the article becoming my first book. But since then, questions surrounding the fate of 3 Marines abandoned during the last battle of the Vietnam War has kept me coming back. The incident that led to the 3 Marines being left on the island in the fog of war was the hijacking of an American cargo ship. The SS Mayaguez was a container ship, and it had departed Hong Kong on a mission around the Southeast Asian countries of Vietnam and Cambodia on its way to Sataheep in Thailand. It was rounding an island called Polawai that was occupied by the Cambodian Khmer Rouge when a gunboat came out and intercepted it. This was about 2:30 or so in the afternoon on May 12, 1975. The ship was taken to that island, Polawai, and remained there that evening. But before it was fully captured, a radio message was transmitted and relayed to Washington, and President Ford was advised at that point that an American vessel had been seized on the high seas. I think you have to recognize the time period. We had suffered the defeats in Vietnam and Cambodia within the previous month, and so there was a dark cloud basically hanging over Washington, and now the freedom of the seas was being infringed upon by the Khmer Rouge. So Ford and Kissinger huddled together with their advisors and decided that they needed to take immediate and strong action. The military response to the Mayaguez capture was being coordinated by 7th Air Force located in Thailand. General Burns was in charge of that. In addition to the forces on Okinawa and in the Philippines that were being rushed to Thailand, he had security police whom he thought might be available to capture the ship. But neither they nor the pilots that flew the helicopters that were located there were trained in anything of the sort. This was a special operation requiring specific skills which they didn't have. But they were military and they did have weapons, so he decided he might as well move them. So at night, the helicopters took off on their way down to Utapao, and one of those helicopters developed mechanical trouble. The rotor failed, and the helicopter plummeted into the ground and exploded. The Mayaguez incident had claimed its first 23 victims. Intelligence reports were flooding into Washington, and unfortunately most of them were in error in terms of the position of the ship and what was going on. But the one thing that was clear in the minds of Ford and Kissinger and the CIA Director Colby was that the key thing was to prevent the ship and the crew from reaching the mainland. Once that occurred, they knew they had a really big problem. Trying to rescue the crew at sea was a much simpler task, and so that's what they were focused on. The carrier Coral Sea was ordered to head for the area. In addition, 2 destroyers, the Henry Holt and the Wilson, also changed course for the Cambodian coast near the port of Kampong Sam, where CIA intelligence reported the hostages were being taken. 7th Air Force had ordered some reconnaissance flights, and they included the PV-3 Orion, which is a Navy aircraft operating out of the Philippines. The aircraft had, via its radar, pinpointed the location of the ship, and it had actually been moved from Polawai Island to Koh Tang, a smaller island some 30 miles off the coast of Cambodia. So by daylight, the PV-3 Orion moved closer and lower to try to get a visual sighting and see what was going on. In the process, they noticed small craft moving from the Mayaguez to the shoreline on the east beach of Koh Tang. They assumed, therefore, that some members of the crew were likely being moved from the ship to the island. This intelligence information was reported to 7th Air Force and eventually made its way to Washington. In the process of gathering this information and getting closer to the island, the P-3 came under fire from the forces defending the island, and they also reported that the island appeared to be quite heavily defended. By Wednesday, the 3rd day of the Mayaguez incident, this decision was made by Khmer Rouge forces to bring the crew from Koh Tang to the mainland. They boarded the captured Thai fishing vessel and proceeded in that direction. This was detected by reconnaissance flights out of Thailand. The information was relayed to the White House. And of course, the key was to prevent the crew from getting to the mainland. So that became the issue. The aircraft overhead the Thai fishing vessel have dropped bombs in front of it. They've strafed. They've even used riot control agents in an effort to turn the fishing boat back toward Koh Tang. All these efforts have been unsuccessful. So now the pilots request further instructions. Should they try to disable the vessel? They've seen Caucasians aboard the deck of the ship, so they're convinced there are at least some members of the crew aboard. That information is relayed to Washington and directly to General Scowcroft, who then presents it to President Ford at the National Security Council meeting. Ford now is in a pickle. He has a dilemma. He needs to stop the ship, but if he orders the aircraft to attack the ship, he has no idea of their real capabilities. Will they destroy and sink the vessel and kill the entire crew, and then he be blamed for this immense debacle? Or does he let the boat continue to the mainland, where now it becomes almost impossible to secure the release of the crew? That's what he's presented with. And he's in a quandary. But time is running out, and Scowcroft knows it. Eventually, he interrupts the discussion and turns to President Ford and says, I must tell the pilots what to do. There's a long, silent moment while everyone's attention is focused on Ford. He makes his decision. Sink the patrol boats, but do not attack the Thai fishing boat. A-7 Corsairs and F-4 Phantoms quickly sunk the 2 patrol boats. Apart from minor wounds from shrapnel, the crew of the Mayaguez is shaken but unscathed. Kissinger warns Khmer Rouge leaders that mainland targets will be bombed if the hostages are not released within 24 hours. As the Thai fishing vessel gets closer to the Cambodian port of Kampong Sam, U.S. aircraft abandon surveillance and lose contact with the hostages. Although CIA Chief Colby has no idea of their exact whereabouts, he advises Ford that the crew of the Mayaguez are now in 3 possible locations: on the Cambodian mainland, on the Mayaguez, and in a compound on Koh Tang Island. In reality, the CIA intelligence that became the basis for Ford's plan was incorrect. Instead of being put ashore on the mainland at Kampong Sam, the crew of the Mayaguez were taken to the nearby island of Rong Sam Len. The rescue mission is targeting the wrong island. By the end of the day, 14 May 1975, President Ford had made his decision. Attack Koh Tang and put men over the side and recover the Mayaguez. The plan was to begin the assault 6 minutes prior to sunrise in an effort to surprise the Khmer Rouge. But there's sufficient light well before that. Nautical twilight begins some 30 to 45 minutes prior to sunrise. No one seemed to take that into account. The team there that's trying to put together the plan, they don't have the facts. And this would be borne out later when they did attack the island, because at the moment the plan was finalized, they suspected that Koh Tang was lightly defended, and they were dead wrong in that suspicion. Moments before the Marines were due to depart Utapao Base in Thailand, Captain Davis is given the reconnaissance photos that were so crucially missing during the planning meeting. Davis is in charge of one of the companies leading the assault on Koh Tang Island. The pictures of Koh Tang were taken by the plane which reported being shot at and revealed to Davis that the island is well defended. Given the order to depart immediately, Davis stuffs the photos inside his vest and boards the helicopter. He decides not to brief his men on the latest intelligence. At 4:15 in the morning, Air Force CH-53 helicopters take off and head for Koh Tang Island. 3 helicopters ferry Marines to the USS Henry Hull, from which the assault on the Mayaguez will be launched. On the morning of the 15th, just as the Marines are proceeding on their way to attack Koh Tang, the Cambodians blink. They've had enough. President Ford's aggressive action has made an impact, and they decide it would be best to release the crew, and they do. They are put aboard the Thai fishing vessel, and they begin their trek across the waters toward the SS Mayaguez. A Khmer Rouge radio station announces the release of the crew. But it will take 3 hours for the news to reach the combat commanders in Thailand that the hostages are not on Koh Tang Island. I'm about to follow the route of the Thai fishing boat that was returning the Mayaguez crew to their vessel, anchored off the coast of Koh Tang Island. I'm accompanied by my friend and translator, Noma Sarvam.
This is the pier where the Mayaguez crew, they brought them to the pier.
Oh.
And the people stood on the pier and looked down at the Americans. And the crew on the ship, they argue with the commander on the beach, and the commander says, "You cannot come onto the beach. It is a Navy problem."
I'm returning to Koh Tang Island to continue my investigation into what happened to 3 Marines last seen alive at the close of this flawed attempt to rescue the hostages.
Everybody made it safely, and we're going to head for the beach now. Okay, I just ran into a spider web, and it felt just a little bit like I tripped a landmine. And there he is. I'd say he's got a wingspan about the size of my hand, and he's got a big black ugly head, and I have a feeling he would have been really upset with me if I'd have kept going. But that's one of the things you've got to look out for on this island. Critters like this. They have snakes here that are longer than 8 feet, scorpions, and various other types of things that'll impede your progress immediately if you're not careful. I'm standing on Koh Tang's west beach, and this is where the battle began. It was planned as a diversionary attack by the Marines, intended to draw the Khmer Rouge from the eastern beach, where the Mayaguez crew was thought to be held captive, and then once the Khmer Rouge had moved out of positions, immediately thereafter the main assault on East Beach would occur. Timing was critical, and inside those helicopters, the first 2, Knife 2-1 and 2-2, the Marines sitting in those webbed seats heard the officers cracking out the orders to lock and load. And every one of them knew that in moments they would become part of Marine Corps history, taking another beach. But instead of jumping from the ramps of a Higgins boat, this time they'd be jumping out the ramp of an Air Force helicopter. But the noise of those helicopters was heard on the beach from miles out. And so the Khmer Rouge were in position and ready to defend their beach long before the helicopters actually reached the shoreline. And as that first helicopter swung in and began to reverse position so he could discharge the Marines, 50 caliber rounds began slamming into the side of the aircraft. They hit the rotor head and the transmission, and warning lights flashed for the pilot. The ramp went down. Marines rushed onto the beach and returned fire and hit the ground, pinned down. Once the Marines have exited and charged up the beach and begun to return fire, he tries to escape the withering fire. He adds power to the one good engine, which is only putting out partial power, and does make it airborne, goes about 100 yards, impacts the water for a moment, and scoops up some more water, gets airborne a second and third time, until eventually he's got too much water and too little power, and the aircraft settles into the water. Sergeant Rumbaugh, the crew chief, assists the co-pilot, who's having quite a bit of difficulty getting out. He finally extricates him from the co-pilot position, but unfortunately Sergeant Rumbaugh gets trapped in the wreckage as the aircraft rolls over and sinks. Once the Marines were on the beach, they had to establish their perimeter, so a patrol was sent south, and it came around the point behind me and started making their way up through the jungle right in front of me here to the left. And about this point, they came under fire from a Khmer Rouge position higher up on the hill. Now, directly in front of me is the Khmer Rouge machine gun position. The key to setting this up is field of fire. Now, they would have cut down all the vegetation, and from this point, they would be able to fire on the helicopters, Knife 2-1 and 2-2, that are trying to attack West Beach. They could fire on any patrols that were trying to come around the point, and to the south, they would have control of the point and any force that might be coming in from that side. If things got really hot in here, they could duck behind this enormous tree for protection. Perfect site. And here's where they shot at the helicopters coming in and out of the island.
With one helicopter lost and the other forced to abort because of damage inflicted by the Khmer Rouge machine gun, the day had begun very badly. Moments later, the next wave of helicopters bringing in Marines for the main assault were closing in on Koh Tang.
The first two helicopters that came in on a main assault to the East Beach came in from a position behind me, low and fast. And as they approached the beach about 100 yards out, they began to slow to a hover, and that's when they came under fire. Knife 3-1 was first in the barrel. A rocket-propelled grenade struck the cockpit area and exploded, killing the co-pilot. Fire erupted inside the main cabin in the helicopter. It then crashed. The machine gunner, right on the beach at point-blank range, began pouring .50 caliber machine gun rounds into the fuselage of that helicopter. Inside, the Marines could see blue tracers flashing through and smashing into flesh and bone. Of the casualties that occurred during the Mayaguez incident, most of them occurred inside that helicopter. About 100 yards from where Knife 3-1 was shot down and crashed and burned. And since 1975, artifacts from that helicopter have been washing up on the shore. This is part of a Marine Corps' bulletproof vest, and you can see fire damage on it. And the circular burn pattern across these Kevlar panels indicates that it was from a liquid fire, most likely. And the fuel tank had exploded and the fire consumed the helicopter. I also have a circuit breaker panel, which has been blackened, and you can see the circuit breakers, which are normally white in color so you can identify them in low light, are now totally black and covered with carbon. So both of these artifacts very likely came from helicopter Knife 3-1 back on May 15, 1975.
I've timed my visit to Koh Tang to meet with members of a Pentagon Missing in Action investigation team. JPAC, as they're known, are tasked with recovering the remains of American troops killed in action going back to World War II. Since 1992, JPAC teams have undertaken several missions to Koh Tang. Today they're searching for the men still missing after Knife 3-1 sank in flames. In order to find their remains, forensic archaeologist Richard Wills is trying to locate what's left of the helicopter.
I'm green on the GPS, green on the mag, and it's interpolating, so I'm going to start logging. This creates a map using the GPS data, and it'll tell us the relative locations of the metal anomalies, the magnetic anomalies, so that we can go back and dive on them or know where they are located. And there's a huge one right there.
Got a hit.
Yeah, that's a big one. Well, it could be just something of a ferrous nature. It could be part of a helicopter, or it could be some other piece of debris in here. There is a lot of helicopter wreckage in this area, so
I'm gonna come around.
Yeah, go ahead.
To press home the main assault, right behind Knife 3-1, another helicopter flew in fast and low to drop more Marines on the East Beach landing zone. Knife 2-3 came in a little closer to my position and was taken on by a machine gun to my right. That machine gun shot off the tail rotor of the helicopter, which then spun into the surf about 100 yards behind me. Inside was Marine Lieutenant Cicery and his platoon, and he was faced with a critical decision. Should he stay inside the helicopter and return fire from there using the fuselage for some type of protection, or should he order his men out into the teeth of the enemy fire? It was a defining moment, and he chose not to leave his men inside where they could be cut to pieces. He ordered them out onto the beach. So I'm looking out here and trying to imagine those Marines trying to maintain their footing as they ran through these rocks and coral with their weapons and ammunition loads. And Cicery urging them on. And at some point he falls and loses his eyeglass. But he kept coming, and they finally made their way onto the beach into this rocky enclave right here and set up a perimeter. And these huge boulders were the only thing between them and the intense fire coming from both directions, and from the mortars that were being fired from that pit on the tip of the cove. It was from here that the Khmer Rouge first heard the sound of the approaching American helicopters that were coming in from this direction. And it was from right here that the first shots rang out against what was intended to be the main invasion force moving into East Beach. And finally, it was from right here that one of the biggest thorns in the side of the Marines took place, and that is the mortar position that began walking rounds from where their helicopter crashed on into where they had evacuated onto the beach. Within minutes of the assault on the beaches, 3 helicopters are destroyed and more than a dozen Marines are dead. In contrast to the firestorm encountered on the beaches of Koh Tang, the Marines assigned to board the Mayaguez meet with no resistance. Khmer Rouge on board have abandoned the ship. When the crew of the Mayaguez are safely aboard the Wilson, the priority changes to getting the Marines off the island before they're killed or become hostages of the Khmer Rouge. Early in the afternoon, Jolly Green helicopters bring Captain Davis's company ashore. Their task is to secure the perimeter from where the West Beach troops will be evacuated. It includes the 3-man machine gun team led by Lance Corporal Joseph Hargrove. 24-year-old Hargrove hailed from Mount Olive, North Carolina. He was a damn good shot with an M60 machine gun, and he carried a pocket Bible into combat that afternoon. Raised near Cincinnati, Private Gary Hall was a month before his 19th birthday when he hit Koh Tang's West Beach. Private Danny Marshall grew up in Waverly, West Virginia. At 5'2", his pack, M16, and ammo cans weighed half as much as he did, but size never mattered a lick to Danny. Right, I'm standing on the extreme southern flank of the Marine position. This is the most dangerous spot. And here's where Hargrove, Hall, and Marshall set up their machine guns. I dug a .50 caliber machine gun round out of this berm some years ago. And since the Marines didn't have any .50 caliber, we know it was Khmer Rouge. There were shell casings scattered all around this area. Hall set up his M60 machine gun. Once he had it in place, he had a field of fire that extended from straight ahead all the way around to the beach. He could defend attacks coming up the shoreline or coming from the heights directly in front of me here all the way over to here. And because of that, he had to keep up a steady stream of fire. So the ammo carrier was feeding ammunition, and Hargrove was giving the orders to make sure that the Khmer Rouge kept their heads down all afternoon. He made possible the safety of every member of that company all afternoon. And of course, because he was on the far extreme, he would be the last one to pull out. It's dark. We've got gunfire, smoke, no moon, lots of chaos, lots of confusion. Who's still on the island? Who's not on the island? We're trying to get casualties, wounded men off of the island. And in the process of all this confusion, not all of these things take place. Now, as the last helicopter approaches Koh Tang to pick up the remaining Marines, Captain Davis, the man in charge, he has a problem. In fact, he makes a radio transmission.
What can you do for us? We're coming, man. We're coming. How many people are you going to have left?
He says, I'm doing the best I can. I don't know who's here and I don't know who's left.
I just don't know. It's dark out here. I don't know who's going and who's here. I'm going to just have to do the best I can.
And that's the truth, because in all the confusion, it's very difficult to keep track of names and personnel. But he does his best. He gets what he thinks is all the Marines aboard the helicopter, and away they go. But someone aboard the helicopter tells him that there are men still alive on the beach. That is transmitted via radio to the aircraft overhead, and they prepare for another mission to go in and withdraw Marines. But within minutes, another transmission is received from the same helicopter, and Captain Davis passes on the word that no, in fact, we've got them all off the island. There are no Marines left.
Captain Davis advised that all Marines are on the island. Okay, I understand. That's exactly what we're looking for.
But in fact, 3 Marines, a machine gun team, who had spent those last minutes defending the flank of the Marine position, are, in fact, on the island. One man who knows what happened to Hargrove, Hall, and Marshall is M. Son. He was the Khmer Rouge soldier in charge of defending Koh Tang. I've asked M. Son to take me to the place where the first member of the machine gun team was killed and then buried on the island. Can he describe the American that was shot 10 meters from the tree? Was he wounded when they got him? When the Marine was shot there, was it during the battle or the next day?
That's after the battle.
Yeah, okay.
And that less than a week, the guy who got shot.
Later, when they did capture the Americans, what happened? Despite extensive excavations by JPAC, the remains of Hargrove, Hall, and Marshall have not been found. 6 other American Koh Tang combatants are also still missing. The work of the mapping team will help any future attempts by JPAC to recover the remains of those still missing in action. Today, they're searching for metal from the wreck of the first helicopter downed and the first fatality of the day, Crew Chief Elwood Rumbaugh. Once word of the recovery of the Mayaguez crew is received in Washington, there's jubilation. And immediately following that is a clampdown on information. And that clampdown included information about U.S. casualties, because that is not what President Ford wants the public to focus on. He's achieved a victory. He's recovered the crew of the Mayaguez intact. He's recovered the SS Mayaguez itself. He's validated the principle of freedom of seas. And that's the message, not what it cost. And in the end, 40 crew members of the SS Mayaguez were rescued at the cost of 41 American servicemen. Among those were 3 members of a machine gun team, the last casualties of the Vietnam War. And their fate, suppressed all these many years, is just now coming to light.
I grew up in Bremen, Georgia, about an hour west of here. Graduated from high school there. Came to Georgia Tech 1952. Met Pat Epps along the way. We graduated in 1956. I had been accepted for pilot training with the Air Force after ROTC, but was delayed for a year on that to go on active duty. So I worked for Lockheed out here in Marietta. And then in 1957, I entered pilot training down in Bainbridge, Georgia. I was very fortunate, flew first group that flew the T-37. Went from there to Laredo, Texas, T-33, and got my wings. Came back to Moody Air Force Base flying F-86Ls.
What put you on a track to go into ROTC and then into the Air Force? Is that something you wanted to do since you were a kid, or when did that kick in for you?
Well, growing up during World War II, formative years, I heard about these guys, flying tigers, running around China, strafing trains and doing things in the big raids. And I thought that must be really neat. But I never thought I'd get a chance at it until I got to Tech and found out there was ROTC and that I could have a chance.
And what made you choose Tech?
Probably because of the football team right then. Plus, my next door neighbor was a ham radio operator, and he convinced me that if I went to Tech and got an electrical engineering degree, my future was secure.
At what point in your Air Force career did you get introduced to the F-105?
I was in graduate school at Southern California in 1965-66. And while I was there, I was thinking I'm going to miss out on this war because I had a lot of friends that already had assignments. But I received an assignment at the time before I finished out there for the 105. And the sequence of events was I'd go to survival school at the completion and then to Nellis Air Force Base and check out in the 105 to go to Tak Lee, Thailand.
So when you were at Nellis, how often did you get into Las Vegas?
Surprisingly, I didn't go down there as much as you'd think during that time. We were pretty busy. I went out a few times to make sure I wasn't going to win any extra money.
Tell me as much as you can remember about your journey to Vietnam. How did they get you over there? Did you fly an airplane over there, or did they ship you some other way? Just tell us about going to Vietnam and your first impressions of being there.
Okay. I left from Fort Walton Beach, Eglin Air Force Base in the end of March of 1967. I flew commercially to San Francisco and then up to Travis Air Force Base, where I was on a military contract flight that island hopped to the Philippines, Clark Air Base, and I went through jungle survival school there for about 10 days. And then I flew again on a contract flight to Bangkok, and then on a military airplane, C-47, the old Goonie Bird, up to Tak Lee.
And what do you remember about stepping off an airplane for the first time?
I had a very memorable introduction. The fellow who was the ops officer for my squadron and the one that became my flight commander subsequently said, "Welcome to the 354th, the highest loss rate squadron in Southeast Asia." Yeah, what a good deal. And about a week later, I went up and met with the wing commander who welcomed the new people. And he told us that in 2 years of operation, the track record was in the 100 missions or 1 year tour, you had a 50-50 chance of being shot down. If you were shot down, you had a 50-50 chance of being rescued. Welcome to the war.
Most pilots are in love with the airplane that they flew, but some of those loss rates had to do with the airplane you were flying, correct?
The loss rate, I think, was primarily the mission. But backing up, when I was in graduate school and we knew people were getting assignments, I had volunteered or indicated an interest in every airplane in Southeast Asia except the F-105. And that was based on a briefing from Colonel Yeager when he was head of the test pilot school. He described it as an electronic monster. Can't understand why the Air Force wasted their money on this thing. So I was not particularly happy when I got my assignment. But by the time I checked out in the airplane, started flying it, I started to really like it. By the time I left to go to war, I won't say I was in love with it, but I was proud I was flying it. And the more I flew it, the prouder I was. But our mission, since we only flew in North Vietnam, made us extremely vulnerable. We didn't have much, what do we say, milk runs. Maybe on a bad weather day you'd do a recce down in Route Pack 1 north of the DMZ, and that was pretty easy. But I was on my 47th mission, and 31 of them were in the Hanoi area. I'd already beaten the odds 2 or 3 times. I never got to meet Colonel Oles, but he was the commander of the 8th Wing over at Ubon when I was flying, and they flew MiG-Cap on several missions into Hanoi that I was on. But I did not meet him personally until after the war.
So, obviously your missions were into dangerous territory, and I've read that, well, I won't get into reasons, but because of our unwillingness to stop the stuff coming in from the Russians, they had a very robust anti-aircraft defense system. So I imagine every mission was just tremendously high risk.
There were a few missions, like when we would do road recce or just general reconnaissance missions down in the lower route packs 1, 2, or 3, that were you almost say were fun. Get out and roam around and see the countryside while you were doing it. But yes, when we went into the Hanoi area, the expression was, when you got up there, your ass belongs to Uncle Sam, put those bums on target. And there were some missions that everything is there. We went in, at the time I was there, we'd make run-ins at low altitude, around 1,500, 2,000 feet, to try to stay out of the radar for the SAMs and the radar guns. Therefore, small arms fire was a risk that you had to avoid. But in the pattern that we flew, we'd pull up to about 14,000 feet and then come back in on a dive. And that's when the radar could pick you up. Where the first month or so I was there, where the MiGs would be laying for us right over Hanoi. And one mission I was on, we had MiGs going up with us in the pop. We had 105s and MiGs and 105s and MiGs, and SAMs going off and flak all around. I don't know who the MiG leader was that day, but he wasn't too smart. Oh, you could almost watch a gauge drop. I used to laugh. Say, put your hand on the floorboard, you could feel it going by. I'm trying to think. Typical fuel consumption was probably about 3,000 gallons or pounds an hour. The afterburner jumped to a little over 6,000.
So you didn't do that unless you meant it.
No. The best I did, I guess I got it about 1.3 or 4. But that's an interesting story if you want to put on.
Yeah, go ahead. I'd love to hear it.
We were on a mission on Sunday afternoon in a railroad yard just northeast of Hanoi, across the Red River Bridge there. And my flight leader, we were the number 1 bomb flight, and there was a flak suppression flight ahead of us, and the number 4 guy there had been hit and was going down under the clouds. We had about a 2,000 foot level layer. And so my flight leader says, I'm going to follow him down. So that meant me leading the mission out. And about the time I got out and got to recover right across Hanoi, and that's where we were in afterburner, accelerating out of there and jinking. A SAM went off so close that I flew through the colored cloud, which only lasted a couple of seconds. And I came back and I told them that day, I said, I think the biggest damage I did was going across Hanoi supersonic, blowing out all the windows in town. But as we got out, I was starting to climb out, and a fellow from up here in Georgia who happened to be in my squadron too, I recognized his voice, called me and he says, single 105, 18 east of 97, shake it, you got a MiG on you. So I did a split S right down through the cloud layer, pulled up, and when I did and looked out, there was a mountain ridge on either side of me out here, at least 500 feet higher than me. And I came back out of there rather subdued, to say the least. And I remember I got back and went through debriefing. And intelligence at that time, if you had a tough mission, they'd pull out this bottle of bourbon, old Overholzer, I remember, and they'd give you a shot. And I threw that one down, and I started telling him about the mission. He pulled us, "So you like another?" And I said, "Yeah." And I says, "Can I have another one?" I had my third shot of bourbon. We got through the debrief, and I looked at my watch. It was about 5 minutes till evening church time. And I went down to the chapel. I knew this Methodist minister was down there, and I leaned up and right up in his face. I said, "It was a close one today, but he got me back here." I said, "You think I'll be okay here?" He says, "You'll be glad you're here. Come on in." But that was probably my most exciting day, other than being shot down.
I guess a day you probably don't enjoy talking about, but I hope you will, July 5th, 1967. And maybe, you know, I'd love for people who, particularly young people, to understand what your day was like. Not just the fact that you were shot down, but your usual day and preparing for a mission. And all you can remember about that day would be wonderful.
I don't have any trouble talking about it. July the 5th, 1967 was obviously a very special day, and two or three things led up to that, in that I had just been appointed or signed as the executive officer of the squadron, and we were having an inspection. We had a new commander. He asked me to do a check around to make sure we were ready and get acquainted myself, so I had not flown for 3 days. I had sat as spare when they needed, but I didn't get off. And I remember on the night of the 4th of July, I wrote a letter home, and I said, "Well, I missed the fireworks again today, but Fergie promised me tomorrow for sure." And sure enough, I went out the afternoon mission. I dropped that report off on the commander's desk and headed out. And later on, talking to people in Hanoi when we were together, almost without exception, all of us acknowledged there was something different about the way we felt that day. We couldn't put our finger on it, but it wasn't like a normal day. And I kept trying to think the whole time, what have I forgotten? What did I do or not do, or what? And as it turns out, obviously it was that sense, I guess, of the impending, what was imminent. But in my case, I was the number 4 airplane in a second flight on a railroad siding right up near the Chinese border. And just as we started our roll-in of the first flight, there was a call for MiGs about 20 miles west of us at our altitude. So as number 4, that's part of my responsibility. So I took a quick look out there to see if I could pick them up. And I didn't see anything, but when I looked back, my leader had already started rolling in, and the flak was so thick that I couldn't see down, so I had to stay up till some bombs went off and I could see the target. Consequently, I had to adjust my roll-in. Instead of being in a 45-degree dive, I was probably at least 60 coming straight down, and I had to adjust the altitude, drop the bombs. And I flew through 3 levels. They were laying out flak at level 3, about 3,000 feet apart. I made it through the 3 of the levels of flak, but just as my bombs came off, I felt a hit. I'd been hit twice before, so it was unmistakable. But this time, my procedure was, when I dropped the bombs, was hit the afterburner, pull out, let that give me the thrust, and start my jinking. Well, when I hit the afterburner, the airplane just did a tumble. And I came back out, it stabilized, and I I remember this distinctly. Boy, that'd be a heck of a ride at Coney Island. I'd never been there, but I'd heard about it. So I relaxed, put the burner back in, get out of here, and the airplane just started flipping and tumbling. And I couldn't see out because of the flames, but I was still going to try to make it as close as I could to the water. We'd come in off the Gulf and we're going back out that way. But about that time, the camera up in front of the dash under the windscreen broke loose, and I had to duck as it went over my head. And as I was looking, the instrument panel just started crumbling, and the airplane was starting to come apart. So I leaned back, put myself in position, pulled the handles, and I remember thinking nothing happened. Boom, it's gone. And I had a very interesting experience in that I grayed out. I couldn't see anything, didn't feel anything. I was just kind of floating. I thought I was dead, literally. And then I started feeling some pressure, and my vision started coming back, and I could see a little bit of green. And then all of a sudden I could see the canopy of, the tops of the trees, and I'm coming down. And I looked up to see if the canopy was open, and it was just starting to blossom. And I reached up to get it, and when I put my hands on the risers, they collapsed. I was sitting on a log on the ground. And that all took less than 2 seconds, because had those automatic systems that got me out, pull to shoot, not worked, I wouldn't be here talking to you today. I figure I went out inverted in negative G's and probably maybe even ejected toward the ground. I don't know. No idea. But somebody up there was looking out for me that day again, like the day that over Hanoi supersonic.
You're not any place you want to be.
Well, the first thing, obviously, that I did once I was on the ground, sitting on the log, my emergency beeper was going off. Get that off so I can talk. But I couldn't get up to it. I couldn't get it cut off. I didn't think. I realized after the fact that I had, because 2 others had been shot down, and their beepers were the ones that were going off, blocking things. But I made an immediate call. Told them I was down safe. I'd check in an hour. That's really optimistic. But sitting on the log looking down was kind of ironic. I looked down and looked at the tree. This is just like North Georgia. Those hills, same kind of scrub trees and pine tree that rubbing around, the ground's gravelly. Then all of a sudden it dawned on me, these ain't going to be friendly North Georgia mountaineers. Everybody I see now may be looking to kill me. So I started trying to get rid of stuff. My chute was caught in the trees. I couldn't get it down. My survival kit that comes out separately had banged down, and I couldn't get it open. But I could get the side open that had the jungle hat with a mosquito net and a bottle, 2 cans of water. And I pulled out the water, stuck them in my flight suit, put the hat on, threw my helmet down the hill, hoping that would make them think I'd gone that way. And I started up the hill, which was the instructions, the recommendations from survival school. And as I got to almost to the top of the hill, and I could see a path out here that I was going to go to, I hesitated just long enough. I think actually my G-suit got caught in some brambles and kept me from pushing these bushes open. And a Vietnamese ran across closer than 4 feet away. The only thing, he was in a hurry or didn't look my way. So that caused me to look around a little bit and the path, and then I saw these field wires across the way. When I leaned up and looked, I'd come down right in the gun ring. There was a gun sight down here about 100 yards and another one over here about 100, 150. And so I reconsidered my actions at this point, don't get too carried away. But I managed to get across that path without leaving a track with the boots. And I thought if I got over on the other side and down the hill, I could hide out for that hour and check in and maybe get picked up, get out of here. And I didn't realize when I got across, all the brush was over here. I was in grass, maybe a foot, 1.5 feet high. And when I got to the edge and looked down, it was a drop off into a bog. I wasn't going anywhere in that direction. So I sat down and opened one of the cans of water, and at that point I was so thirsty I didn't think there was enough water around. I took 2 sips, and I thought it was going to come out my ears, all the psychological, the shock effects. But I managed to drink it, forced it down, threw the can away. And about that time, I heard voices were gathering up over here along the trail. And they were pointing and talking. And I'd heard some shots and hollering back and forth. They'd obviously found my parachute and helmet. And so they'd eliminated that side. They just really were going to come over here. And they did, and they came out. And I did this and tried to get anything white out of sight and hide down. But it turned out I wasn't going to hide under anything. They walked up and tapped me on the shoulder and welcomed me to North Vietnam. The ones that came out and got me were actually militia. They were in civilian clothes. One of them had a rifle.
I don't mean to interrupt, but these are regular North Vietnamese.
No, these civilian. They're like militia.
Oh, okay.
They're in civilian clothes. I don't know how they fit into the system right there then, but like I say, one of them had a rifle, and they started stripping me down. And of course, when I got my pistol out over here, one of them pulls it out and looks at it. And I don't know why, it was just a sixth sense. I just happened to glance up just as he was starting to come across and hit me in the head, and I ducked and missed him. And the guy with the rifle leaned across and hit him with a butt in his chest, knock him back. And I remember thinking, you and I are going to be friends. I don't know about the others, but I like you. But they packed me down. Well, they started me, took off my boots, stripped out everything out of the flight suit. One amusing thing, I carried a half a pack of Salems because we'd been told that Ho Chi Minh liked those, and if Ho Chi Minh did, most everybody else probably would. And I carried some Winston cigarettes too. They pulled the cigarettes out, looked at them, crumbled them up, and threw them away. And I said, well, so much for intelligence. But they started walking me, and I realized if I walked very far barefooted, my feet were not going to be in a condition to do anything else. So as we started down the trail, I started watching, and I saw a root coming up, and I hooked my foot in it and fell over and convinced them that I'd hurt myself. And I got them to carry me all the way down the side of the mountain. And we stopped in a little village. They put me in a house in the back corner on a bed. And I was there, I'd say, between 30 minutes and an hour. And he came in, tapped out, and walked back out. And I got in this, I called it a safari wagon. It was bigger than a Jeep, but not as big as you see safaris nowadays, but open vehicle with a canvas top. And they put me in the back seat, one guy on each side. They're holding my arms like this, I wasn't tied up. But I looked up as the fellow on my left in English said, "You're now the prisoner of the Chinese Liberation Army." And what I saw in front was a picture of Mao Zedong and Lin Pao, head of the premier and the head of the People's Army. And I couldn't put my hand up and do the Marine salute, but I said something, well, okay, you really did it to yourself this time. Because I figured I was gone to China because we were that close to the border. I learned over the next 24 hours that that's why the gun sights were so good down there. The Chinese were running them all. And what we had rolled in over, literally, that got us was what we considered probably the best gun sight in North Vietnam. Of course, now I knew why. And later, in '79, when Deng Xiaoping came to this country, he acknowledged that they had 300,000 regular troops in North Vietnam for the war. So that's what they were doing. And it was also why we had been briefed about 2 or 3 weeks before that there would be no attempted rescues in the buffer zone right up near the border. That they finally acknowledged that those were the Chinese. And I'd have to say that overall, I was well treated with them. They brought me something to eat. They wanted me to do a radio broadcast, which I declined with no pressure. And that night, the commandant came in. They introduced him as the commandant. And through the translator said that if I cooperated with them, that I would be treated well, and I'd be taken to Beijing and be treated well. And I declined that kind offer also, because because in 1967, Beijing and the moon were about the same distance from Atlanta, Georgia, as far as I was concerned. I did not know, I should say, that we had an F-104 pilot that had been shot down in September of '65 who was already in Beijing. And he came home when we did, and I introduced myself to him and told him my opportunity to meet him. He said, "You made a good choice." He spent 7.5 years in solitaire. And after during the 24 hours with the Chinese, when I knew, they took me around the next day to various gun sites. We'd stop someplace, and about 8 or 10 guys would come out in uniform and line up. And I called him the cheerleader. The head guy would get out his little red book, and he'd read and chant and read, and he'd chant. And the translator then would say, "The U.S. will surely be defeated. The Vietnamese people will surely be victorious." Okay, that's nice. And one thing out of that, which really surprised me, was that almost every one of these guys had a camera. And when the chanting and cheerleading was all over, they'd all gang around there, all making pictures. So I had my fingers crossed that somebody was going to make a picture to get out, because I knew with my close call I was probably going to be reported as killed in action. So I cooperated with the picture making at that point as much as possible. But that afternoon, they took me up to a place, I guess it was either a subordinate or a corresponding headquarters, where I met some more regular Army. And I had, I guess you'd say, a test of wills. They started the chanting again, and this time they wanted me to say it. And I told them, "No, I'm not going to say that." And one of the guys, I don't know what they smoked, but his eyes showed he had something more than issue, maybe a old overholster. But he comes up with his rifle and puts the bayonet right under my chin and pops it up like that, while the translator's right here saying, "You must say it." And I wouldn't shake my head. I just did kind of like that. And after 2 or 3 times like that, and for him saying, "You must say it," I finally just did my lips tight like a grim, so I'm not going to say that. And an officer obviously came up and got this guy to back off with a rifle. But I wasn't too sure there for a while, because I could see the rifle bore was clean. It was operable. But once that was over, back in the truck, back down to where I'd been before, in an area with a cave. That was my house right then. And they let me take a nap, and the commander came by and motioned like that, and went out and got in the truck and went down, and they turned me over to the North Vietnamese. And I remember when it made that offer and to go to Beijing, I said, "No, I want to go to Hanoi." The guy looked at me and just kind of shook his head. So when he turned me over, I leaned back out and I wanted to shake hands with him, and we did, which is part of the story, because I hope to meet him later on. But anyway, the Vietnamese blindfolded me, and took me down to, I'm pretty confident, to Kep Airfield. And I got a jet helicopter ride into Gia Lam, right downtown, and then a truck ride across the river to the big prison, Wallow. We referred to Wallow as the Hanoi Hilton,
Oh, that's the
but
Hanoi Hilton.
but also
Yeah.
Hanoi Hilton tends to encompass all the camps. If you were in Hanoi, you were in the Hilton, although everybody, with few exceptions, processed through the big prison initially. And I went into New Guy Village there, learned I wasn't nearly as big, mean, and tough and strong as I thought I was. A couple of little fellas with a rope can get you to do and say things that you didn't plan to. And another one that got my arms up behind me for the better part of a day, convinced me to do some things. It had been opened in, I think, summer, June, July area of 66. And they called it the farm because out the edge of town, and you could hear the chickens and the animals and things around, and they named the buildings for things like the barn and the stable and the chicken coop. And it was an old French movie studio, so there was a theater there, that was obvious. They had a swimming pool, and one was a pool hall. So all those names fit in. But one of the guys that was living in front of the pool hall was a real character. One day, well, almost all the doors had these little openings in them. We call them peeps for short. And that's what they'd open up and look, check on you every morning and during the day or at night or whatever. One of the guards came by one day and did that. And after he walked off, this fella tapped his neighbor next door, says, "The first zoo I've ever been in where the animals look at the people." And from then on, it was the zoo. After the zoo, sometime during the summer of 70, the Vietnamese were readying a new facility for us at an existing army post out again to the west of Hanoi. And they had moved at least two groups in there earlier, one of them from the from the San Tay prison where the raid took place later on. But it was the first time we had compound living, so to speak. It was a big, long barracks that was divided into several rooms. Excuse me. But after a few days, we were all out together. They'd come in, just unlock the doors in the morning. We had to run to the place till siesta time, noonish, when they'd put us back in for a couple hours, and then we'd be back out. We had to run to the place till time to lock up to go to bed. We had a latrine area and a wash shower area. It definitely was not Hogan's Heroes, but it was so much better than anything we had had. We were getting sunshine, exercise, and then the San Tay raid popped in, and that was about 6-7 miles away. We heard all the fireworks and see the airplanes and activity, and it scared the bejesus out of the Vietnamese. 2 days later, we were all loaded up, now taken back down to the big prison, Wallow, downtown. And they had opened up an area in the back that we knew was back there because when I was there before, we could hear people back in there. They'd been using it for political prisoners as well as South Vietnamese prisoners they'd captured. And these cell blocks were roughly 25 feet by about 55 or 60. And they had up to 100 to 120 South Vietnamese in each one, and there were 50 to 57 of us in each one. And on the concrete slabs, you had about that much space. And we then had guys laying on bedboards around on the floor. It was a crowded sardine can, but it was so nice to be with people that you'd only heard names of for several years, but now you got a face to go with them, a personality, and you got new people to talk to and new stories to hear. And it was actually fun for a few days. The first stop that I made when we went out to the zoo was in the area that we called the Annex. There was a series of buildings, I think there were 9 or 10 of them, where they stored the film from the studio. And in fact, there were old rolls of film around and so on. And I was in this group of 3 other F-105 pilots that had been shot down in early October. We'd gotten there in late October. But none of us knew anything about the tap code. We'd tried to talk across the wall or do something to the group that was next to us. There were 2 units in each building. But we weren't getting anywhere until the next spring, like March. This Navy lieutenant commander came in who knew the code. He had heard it, but he hadn't had a chance to use it, wasn't very good at it. But we were over trying to get the guys next door to respond. And they were tapping on the wall, and we were giving names, and they were giving their names back.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, sir, but how did the code work? Was it a form of Morse code? Or
No,
how'd you know which letter was what tap?
Well, the quick background is one of the very early Air Force officers, I think he was number 6 or 7, shot down, had been talking to a German POW, one of ours who was a German POW in World War II, and talked about this code. And Smitty asked him, what is it? Is it Morse code? No, it's a little matrix, 5 by 5. Excuse me. You drop out the letter K because you can get the same sound using a C. It's A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, right on down. And to tap it, you tap, the first tap is for the row, and the second tap's for the column. So a B would be 1, 2, 2. And my initial W was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, dot, dot. A, dot, dot. And it seems cumbersome till you get it and get going. And once you get established doing it, it's like a lot of other things. You pick up a word from the context and you can get them to go on. And you can do it even faster than the telegraph key, I think. It was a lifesaver for us. But this first effort was really cumbersome. And when they were given their names back, this one came out, as I mentioned, there's no K, you use the C. It came back H-I-C-C-E, something that doesn't make any sense. So you didn't give him an error and get him to do it again. And about the third time, I don't know why it popped in my mind. I said H-I-C, and then all of a sudden I remembered saying, ask if that's Jim. And so he went back, Jim, and came back, yes, and it's Jim Hickerson. And we had been fraternity brothers down here at Georgia Tech, stood side by side at initiation. He went in the Navy right away when I had that delay at Lockheed, but we'd seen each other about 2 years after. Both of us had our wings, but that would have been 10 years later right there in Hanoi. But it was after he and I were then moved, as we call it, across the wall into the main prison. He was up in the barn and I was in the pool hall. So we didn't communicate until about 2 years later when we had what I call a fruit basket turnover, and he moved in next door to me and had taken some of the bricks out of the windows, and I got to lean in and shake hands with him. But then when we went out to the camp we call Faith at the compound living, and then back into the other, we stayed together for the next 2.5, almost 2 years.
Thinking about the whole experience, you had to go through a range of, I shouldn't say you had to, I would imagine you went through a range of emotions.
Definitely.
In the beginning, you're a new opportunity for them. And then there must reach a point where the enemy says, we've done everything with this guy that's of value to us we can do, and now you just become, I shouldn't say just become, now you're a prisoner. When you think back, I mean, there had to be fear, boredom, hunger. I mean, how do you describe the stages of your imprisonment and what it did to you?
Well, first off was the startling realization that Air Force intelligence at survival school was out of touch with the real world. Because I asked the question as part of the process, what do you know about the POWs? You're probably aware of the Hanoi March that had happened in the summer of '66. Oh, and by the way, one of the Navy guys was shot down a couple of days before that happened, and they put him in. He got down and got the president. His quote was one of the famous ones. He said, "You guys do this very often?" But I was concerned about it, and the sergeant told me in the Philippines, "Oh, we've had reports of really good treatment up there." Because says they've been seen out in town at night and in restaurants and theaters and stuff. And I'd been there about a week when I settled down enough, wish I could get my hands on that sergeant again. And also a Marine from Korea. But anyway, I was not prepared for the immediate torture, to be candid. Obviously, in survival school, we were taught name, rank, serial number, date of birth, according to the code of conduct, and evade further question to the best of your ability. But a German POW fellow, U.S. Air Force, who had been German POW when I was there, made the statement that if you have something that they want, they will get it. If you're by yourself, they'll get it out of you. If they're more than one, beware of things they'll do to play you off each other to get it. So once I got the name, rank, serial number, date of birth, and he said, what was your target? And I said, I don't know. And he said, what do you mean you don't know? And his English wasn't that good, but I could understand it. But I used the fact that I couldn't to get him to repeat things to buy time to think about what I was doing and saying. But anyway, he let me know right away that name, rank, serial number is not going to cut it. Oh, in fact, that's one of the humorous things. I told you about faking that injury up in the mountain to get them to carry me. I tried the same thing with the Chinese. They brought in a doctor. He checked me out. Said, no, you're okay. I said, no, no, you're okay. When I get to Hanoi, now I'm in a new venue. So when the interrogator comes in, he says, sit. And he was at a table with this light little gooseneck thing down here with a stool down. He says, sit. So I start like I'm going to hobble over there. And he looks up and he says, maybe you best actor in survival school, but now you in Hanoi. Sit down. That alerted me. This guy is not a dummy. He's in touch. And over the course of the night, he convinced me that their intelligence was immediately up to date. He asked me 2 questions over the course. One I'd been briefed on it the day before I was shot down, and one the day I was shot down as top secret. And he asked me why this happened. First one was why the 104, or the F-4s no longer fly MiG-cap. And I said, you mean they weren't up there today? I thought they were. And then he says, why can you not fly over Hanoi below 10,000 feet now? And we'd just been briefed on that day because there's a French delegation in town. So once that confirmed that I got to be serious about this. And when he was asking these questions, what was your target? I said, I don't know. I was a spare. I pulled in. I just followed them. Who else was in your flight? I don't know. Who's in your squadron? Well, I'm new. I've only been there a short time. He kept pressing for names, so I started coming up with guys from high school and from tech who were 4F or never in. I threw in some names of guys that had finished 100 mission and gone home to be good. And I kept cranking this, and finally, after I don't know how many hours, and several times of tying me up and passing out and coming back to consciousness, he said, why do you keep lying? I said, I'm not lying. They said, yeah, you lie. Same day we shoot down man 357 Squadron, tells us everything. And I thought about that a minute, and I said, well, if he tells you, why you ask me? He said, I want to hear you say. So we're back to the game again. Name, rank, serial number, write down all the same questions. And I remember from survival school, if you're telling a lie and somebody else telling the truth, the liar's in trouble. And I thought, oh gosh, if he really did tell them, I'm in trouble. So I started pulling my answers back to more factual things, but not quite as best I could, but sweating it out. And finally, when he quit about daylight, and this had started a little after dark the night before, and I got the day off, and I lay there, and they brought me some soup and rice to eat, and I got to thinking, he really conned me. He played all those things they told me about in survival school. He did it, and then I bought it hook, line. There ain't nobody else up here now. There you go. And I never heard any reference about another guy till I got to the zoo with those new 105 pilots. And one of the guys had been at the other base at Khmer Rouge. And he said, I knew about you. You were shot down the same day as Ward Dodge. And he was a flight leader in another squad. I said, what do you mean? He said, yeah, he and another guy were shot down that day. They were 357th Squadron. So, yeah, they had the guy. They put him out as died in captivity about a week later. And once I got through the fear, and I mentioned the next day when I said he really hooked me, I got to shape up here and start earning my pay as a major in the United States Air Force. They came in the next morning and says, "Today you write your autobiography." I said, "No, I'm not going to do that. That's Dakota Tonka. You won't write." He says, "I'll order you to." I said, "I don't take orders from you." None of these guys wore rank, so you didn't know who you were talking to really, but they all look like kids. As you know, Orientals tend to look much younger than they are for a long, long time. But we went through that, and they said, "Well, I bring in a camp commander. He orders you to write." I said, "Okay." So he goes, and I was really being this flippant and blasé, no kidding. So he comes back in a few minutes with a guy about his age, same size. He says, "Now, this is the camp commander." And I said to myself, "Oh, yeah, this was Saturday morning." I said, "Oh, yeah, these guys were out drinking beer last night." They said, "Oh, we're going to have some fun with a new guy." He says, he asked, "Will you write your autobiography?" I said, "Nope." They talked in Vietnamese. He says, "He asked you one last time?" I said, "No." He talked to me. He says, "He orders you to write your autobiography." I said, "I take my orders from the Chief of Staff of the United States Air Force." He talked a little more in Vietnamese, and he says, "One more time?" I shook my head. And the camp commander looks up in very good English and says, "You will be very sorry." Got up and walked out. 2 or 3 minutes later, this big guy comes in, biggest Vietnamese I saw. And they put me on the ground, pulled my arms back up behind me. I couldn't do it again. My life depended on it. My palms were together behind my neck. I could scratch my neck. And they put Vietnamese handcuffs right there. And they walked out. And I thought, this ain't a big deal. And about 5 minutes later, my hands were numb, my arms were numb, and shortly my shoulders were numb, and pretty soon my chest was numb. And so I started walking around so I could keep myself alert and active, I thought. Next thing I knew, I'm laying on the floor. I'd obviously fallen and knocked out. And I did that 3 or 4 times till I just gave up, quit trying to walk around. And during the mealtime, that mealtime came, he comes in with a bowl of soup and a plate of rice and holds it up. And I said, "Oh, good. We're going to get a break here, get something to eat." He holds it up, sets it on the table, and he does that. And I shook my head. He walked over and picked it up and walked out. Maybe they are serious about this. Okay, I'll lay here a while longer. So I guess I passed out off and on, because the next time, the afternoon meal time came, he comes in with the soup and rice again, sets it down to that. And I said, "No." But I had been conscious enough during the time that I realized I hadn't seen another American. I've been here for 4 days now. And this was the funny part. I haven't felt my hands all day. This is into the afternoon. I haven't felt anything from my waist up in a good while. If I can't use my hands, I can't feed myself. And I probably can't play golf again. So when he starts to pick up the stuff to go away, I said, "Wait a minute." And he turned around, does that, and I said, "I'll try." He picks it up. And I said, "Okay." He turned around and nodded my head. He wouldn't leave till I said yes. So he left the suit, went out and got the officer. Came back, and the officer asked me, and I tried with him, "I'll try." And he shook his head. So I said, "Okay." So he takes the handcuffs off, and I'd been through rope tying up before, and when they do that, the whole purpose is to cut off circulation, and when they release it, it's like grabbing an electric wire. If you've ever been shocked, of a house curl. Well, this time when he came off, I just shook all over. And they brought in a little booklet, like I never had it down here, but they call it test booklets, the little blue book sort of thing lined with a whole thing of questions. Sit down and write. And so for about 3 or 4 days, I'd sit there and hold a pen in my mouth and push it around with my hands. And I'd get 6 or 8 words on a page that way and use up stuff. And it was questions, "What's your name?" And I put it down. What's your father's name? I put daddy. What's your mother's name? I put mommy. Where were you born? I put early age. You know, just Mickey Mouse. See, I don't know. I guess I was so beaten down by this point I didn't really care what they did. I was going to have some fun in the process. But they never referred to that again. And it proved, for me at least, the whole point was we can make you do it. What that sergeant had said. We'll show you that we run this camp. You'll do what we tell you to do. So from then on, it's a game of how much I could keep them from doing. And then that night, when you were asking, this was really my low point. When I ate that meal and realized that I had been broken. And flying over here, and we had a big thunderstorm. It rained, and I was so thirsty. They hadn't given me any water except when the interrogator would be there, and he'd have a cup and offer it. And I remember I got up and I pulled the table over, put the chair on it, put the stool on it, and got up where I could get this vent, and reached out and got a hold of a limb on the tree so that the rain coming down and run down, and I get some water off my arm. And then it quit raining about the time I got it. And so I went over and leaned up against a wall, just slumped down, and there was one light way over in the corner. And I looked up, and it just kept attracting my attention. And I remember thinking it was like Moses in the burning bush, I guess. And I sat there and I looked at the light. And whether it was a split second or an hour, I can't tell you. But I had an experience of something happened to me, and it was all over. I feel very comfortable, very secure. You're going to live, you're going to get out of this, and you'll go home someday. And from then on, I was able to accept things that happened, and when there would be a crackdown right after escape in a night camp, and other things that would come down, you'd have a little sense that this might be bad. I could just think about it for a minute, and I could feel comfortable again and go on and do what I had to do. And I remember thinking Harry Truman made the statement as president that he had no trouble sleeping every night because he knew he had done the best that day that he knew to do, and he needed his rest for the next day. And I realized that I was able to do that. I could lie down every night and go to sleep no matter what was going on.
And how long had you been a prisoner when that happened?
I was shot down on Wednesday afternoon, and that was Saturday night.
So
3 days.
3 days after you were shot down, you feel you had a moment that gave you, I won't call it peace, but gave you something that got you through the rest of those years.
Yep.
Was there a day in that prison camp after that that you didn't feel that awareness or didn't think about that? Or did that sustain you every single day?
I can't say that I thought it consciously every day, but the feeling was there every day.
And what do you think about that now? What do you think that was?
It still sustains me, and the experience that I had there after we were in those large groups, we started, after some confrontations with the Vietnamese, we started having Sunday church services. And I thought about it a lot. You know, what does this mean to me? What do I do? And I participated, not as an activist, but participated in the services, attended. And when I got home, I went to see another one of our classmates down here at Georgia Tech who had become an Episcopal minister. And I talked to him about it and asked him, you know, how did you make the transition? Because he had been a technical major. How did you make the transition to that? And told him experience. And the first assignment I had when I got back was at the Air War College. And one of my classmates there was a Catholic priest that I got to know fairly well. And I was still in this time, you know, I was saved in that ejection. I went through this other experience. What am I here for? And the Catholic priest helped me put it in the best perspective. He said, don't try to solve the problem. He said, you go through your life looking for the sign or looking for this or what. And he said, you may miss what you're actually here for. He said, just accept the fact that you're here and make the most of it that you can. And that's really what's been with me ever since.
Not like 5.5, almost 6 years a prisoner. How did you find out you were going home and when you were going home? And tell me about that experience.
Well, to put it all in perspective, when Nixon started the bombing again in May of '72, we were in the big prison there at Wallow. And somebody that went to quiz, as we called the interrogations, because that was easier to say and to tap, brought back a message that Nixon is crazy man. We don't know what happens now. But we had in our camp 1 South Vietnamese prisoner and 3 Thai prisoners who were allowed out to work and do things, and of course they were speaking the language, and they were really our intelligence. And we got a heads up that 209 was the number, literally, were going to be moved out of camp. And sure enough, about a week later, 209 of us were moved right up to the Chinese border, deep in the mountains, and a camp that we thought initially was new to us. We learned later on that others had been there ahead of us, who I don't know. But we spent the rest of '72 there and over the winter. And in October, we didn't have radios in each cell there. They didn't have power like we had back in the big prison. We had these little radios in each room, and you got these propaganda broadcasts. Hanoi Hana, we called it, the voice of Vietnam, all the garbage. Up here, they had to do it by quizzes. And one of the fellows that went early picked up, they were asking him, what do you think about this proposed end of the war, whatever? This is in early October. And then I was called out right at the end of October. And he asked me, he said, are you disappointed there was no settlement in October? I said, no, I didn't know there was going to be one. So how can I be disappointed for something I didn't know was going to happen? Wasn't going to happen anyway. And kind of went on with that. And then over Christmas and the holiday and New Year's, it got really cold and we were settling in. All of us were looking to be there in the winter. And one night, the building I was in up the top of the hill, one of the fellows woke us up and said, we just had 3 trucks come into camp. So we all stayed up and we counted 17 trucks. You don't need that many to bring in a month's load of food. Something is up. And the guards came around that morning and let us out to go out to eat or to shave, whatever we were going to do. We had a little area, kind of a little patio we could get out to in our building. And he looks around at one of the other guys and he does this. And then he goes back like that. Looks over and says, something is really up here. So we went back in, and just so we didn't miss out on it, we all started rolling up our gear. That afternoon when the guard came around and opened it up, and he gives us this, which was a signal to roll up, ready to move, we just all leaned over, patted our roll. He got a big smile on his face, and right after dark, they loaded us on the trucks, headed back to Hanoi, and about halfway down mid-afternoon, we stopped and had a little coffee break. They gave us water and little energy bars, coconut bar stuff. And instead of getting back on the truck necessarily that you were on, they divided us out in 4 categories. And what turned out to be the first 2 release groups went back to the big prison. The 3rd release group went to the one we called a plantation, and the 4th one went to the zoo. And, excuse me, we'd been back about a week, and I was at the plantation in the 3rd group. They called us out one afternoon. We lined up, and the camp commander came over, and he read us the protocol from the Paris Treaty. that in itself required that the prisoners be notified within 48 hours of this date. And they were told it, and they stood there for a few minutes waiting for us to do something, and when we didn't, they said, okay, dismissed, and we all filed back into our own little cells, and then we went up hugging each other. So, God, I hope it's true, hope it's true. And in my particular case, I was pulled out and taken up to Wallow. It turns out that after the first release group, there was a little difference of opinion between, the conditions for release were that everybody would be released in 4 equal increments over the next 60 days. So, and with the sick and wounded being released first. Well, the U.S. expected that to be release the sick and wounded, then 4 more increments. The Vietnamese interpreted to be the sick and wounded would be in the first increment. So they had a little hassle about that. And somehow they came up and released 20 guys, just pulled almost at random, came out. So as that was going on, I was pulled up to the second release group. Then they decided, no, the count didn't work, so I went back to the plantation. And then they pulled me out again. And whatever the problem was, we were supposed to be released on the 1st of March. And the camp commander came in, and we had the big, going away thing, special dinner, blah, 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 on the night of, last night in February. And then he told us, he said, maybe you do not go tomorrow. There is a small problem. I will let you know. So the next morning he comes in and said, I don't think so today. And that night he said, maybe tomorrow. And then by March the 3rd, we were said, oh, to hell with it. I hope somebody got out of here anyway. And he came in that night and he says, I think tomorrow, okay. And sure enough, the next morning he comes in and came in. There was a group called, I forget the exact name, but they were an Indian, a Canadian, a Czech, and another Soviet Union type had to come around and inspect everybody. So they came through. We figured, I think we might make it today. And sure enough, about an hour later, we started going out. We got our go-home clothes that we'd been fitted for. We went out to pick them up, put them on. And they walked us out the front gate, and they had their little 20-seat buses out there, and we all got on and headed over to Jialam for the big trip home.
I'd like to hear this.
Well, we got out there as we pulled out onto the ramp, and I saw that 141 out there. Of course, working out there, my neighbor at Craig had gotten out of the Air Force and was test pilot in 141, and I'd walked out into one just before I left to go to Southeast Asia. And I saw that airplane, the United States of America, and that big flag up there. And I told a lot of people, when I walked down and walked up that ramp, I could smell the red clay out of North Georgia. I knew I was going home.
Is that just an expression, or did you really feel like you smelled?
I started feeling like I'm headed home, yeah.
Well, the one question I want to ask you, the penultimate, next to the last, is a lot of things changed for you while you were a prisoner. You found out about losing your father and losing other family members and your wife. And again, if you don't mind my asking, what sustained you through that?
Well, I had premonitions, or indications, I guess you'd say, on both. I only got 2 letters from my wife, and there were 6 lines, but she only used about 4 of them. So all she just said was, the children are fine, they help a lot. Another one was, I moved to Atlanta to go to Emory, the children doing well. You could almost read into it the indifference. And in the case of my dad, the one thing that I got from my mother was a birthday card that was signed Love, Mother. And that was probably one of the really low points when I realized he was gone, because I was looking forward to to seeing him. I knew he was in bad shape when I left, but I was looking forward to going back and seeing him again. And so when I got there to Clark, we'd been there, I don't know, 3 or 4 hours, and they came around and got me and said, there's a colonel up here wants to see you. And he introduced himself from 13th Air Force headquarters. And we were standing in the doorway to the little ward area that I was in, and I looked up, and a technician that had been seeing me around was leaned up to the desk up here about 20, 30 feet. And I don't know why I turned around. There was another technician back standing around over here. This is not going to be a standard conversation. What is it? So he started out casually, told me about my aunt dying and my uncle dying and my father-in-law dying, and then your father died, and your wife got a divorce. And as I've described it, it wasn't a surprise. It was the shock of confirmation. The things I was hoping weren't true, but I had a sense. And it was kind of ironic when I learned about more detail about my wife's divorce. When I was up in the mountains and I hadn't gotten anything, heard anything, I went to a quiz and I asked an officer whom I'd known from way back at the zoo. I said, I hadn't heard anything from my wife in a long time. I said, I'm wondering if maybe something has happened. I said, no, I think everything's fine. And I said, well, I would really like to know. I don't want my children to be hurting or having any problem. He said, okay, I ask. And several months later, I went to quiz with him again, and he said, I asked. He said, I think everything okay. As it turns out, that first quiz was within a week of when she filed for the divorce, and the second one was within a week of when it was granted. And they had sent the paperwork to Hanoi, to Camp of Detention, and since I didn't reply within 30 days, I wasn't contesting it. Well, I was still going through the checkout down at Maxwell Air Force Base in Montgomery, Alabama, but my mother wanted to get the family together at home and visit, and so I flew up commercially, and my ex-wife was here in town at the time. She came out and picked me up at the airport, and we went over to her house, and we were talking. I was going to take my children out with me for this party, and we were sitting there talking, and she said, how you plan on getting to Bremen? Oh, gosh. That didn't cross my mind. Oh, well, I'll rent a car. Oh, no, I guess I can't do that. I don't have a driver's license. Why? I didn't think of riding the bus. I don't know, because that'd been right off the bat. I thought, well, maybe Pat will rent me an airplane, because I had a pilot's license, commercial license. And I wasn't thinking of the fact that you got to have a medical to make it effective. But she said, well, you better do something. So this is getting kind of late if you're going out there tomorrow. So I called him up. I don't know, I guess we were looking at the phone book. I got him at home. And I said, hey, you got any airplane you might rent out tomorrow? He says, what for? I said, well, I need to get out to Bremen with me and the children. He said, when you want to go? And I said, oh, sometime mid-morning or so. He says, hold on a minute. He looked around and he said, how's about 10 o'clock? Would that be good? 10:30? I said, yeah, it'd be fine. So he said, well, you know how to get out to my place? And I said, yeah. He said, all right, I'll see you then. So we come driving up out here, and it turns out he had a demonstration set up for a hoped-for sale with a King Air, I think it was. Anyways, about an 8 or 10 place airplane. And this company, people were here, and they were really nice, welcoming us in. And said, yeah, we'll be glad. And they gave me a ride out to West Georgia Airport, and my brother was there to pick me up. But Pat and I have laughed about that a lot of times.
Those 6 years of your life that you literally gave to this country, and all that happened to you, what would you say to young people? Or what would you, if you could get them all to pay attention to you for the next minute, what would you say?
Well, first I would say that I'm proud of my service. At the time I was there, I honestly believed that we were doing something that needed to be done, because the threat of communism and the expansion of China and their efforts to, particularly in Asia and in Southeast Asia, could have had very difficult future. And while we did not win, and unfortunately I think I have to say we actually did win the combat. Our politicians gave it away later on. But we did accomplish a stalemate, so to speak, and I think we stopped that expansion, gave those countries a chance to get on a little firmer basis. As far as Vietnamese people, I was disappointed for them, the boat people, that many were killed or died in the process of getting out of there, and in Cambodia that were literally killed during the Pol Pot regime. I don't think we can take any pride at all in allowing that to happen, but when we finally started recognizing the Vietnamese, I was asked by one of the local stations, what do you think about it with the trade and then the recognition? And I said, well, we went over there to give them a chance for self-determination, and it looks like they're finally going to get it. And on the 2 trips I've made back over there, I think we really did win hearts and minds because they really like Americans there now. But for the status now and the condition and the future of this country, I have real concern. The last few years, the mood of the country, the culture of the country, society have changed in ways that I cannot say that I feel proud about. But I do talk to enough young people who have good attitudes and good patriotic values that I'm optimistic that they will rise to the top and be the cream of the crop, and we'll get this country back on track someday.
Aviation, the art of aeronautics, began with the dreamers, inventors, and daredevils who dared to defy gravity. The journey of aviation was nurtured by pioneers like the Wright brothers, whose first flight marked a historic milestone. The role of aircrafts in world wars was groundbreaking, dramatically changing warfare strategies. This initiated a technological evolution in aviation, transforming the simplistic wings of a biplane into the thunderous roar of jet engines. Let's journey through the ages of aviation. Behind every great aircraft, there were great minds. These visionaries, like Sir Frank Whittle, the innovator of the turbojet engine, redefined air travel. Then there's Skunkworks Kelly Johnson, the genius behind the SR-71 Blackbird. His designs combined speed, stealth, and power, crafting machines that dominated the heavens. The contributions of these pioneers have left an indelible mark on the canvas of aviation, shaping the course of history and inspiring generations of engineers and aviators. Each epoch in aviation history gave birth to extraordinary aircrafts, each with their own unique features and roles. The Lockheed SR-71 Blackbird was a marvel of speed and stealth. The F-105 Thunder Chief, a supersonic fighter bomber, was vital in the Vietnam War. The P-51 Mustang, a long-range fighter, was critical in World War II. The P-47 Thunderbolt, a heavyweight fighter, was used extensively in the same war. The A-10 Thunderbolt II, the Warthog, is a close air support icon. The Messerschmitt Me-262 marked a leap forward in aviation technology. Each of these game changers were instrumental in their eras, and their legacies still resonate today. Beyond the game changers, there are those that have transcended their practical roles to become icons. The Concorde was not just an aircraft, it was a supersonic symbol of luxury and speed. The B-52 Stratofortress, a strategic bomber, is an icon of power and resilience. These magnificent machines and others like them have become much more than just aircrafts. They are enduring icons that encapsulate the audacious spirit, the relentless innovation, and the boundless ambition that define the world of aviation. For more amazing aerial footage, and to join us in this incredible journey, check out the DroneScapes YouTube channel.
If you enjoyed this video, please remember to like and subscribe. And as always, thank you for watching.